morning, friends, and welcome to Vlogmas. Today is, December 17th. It is 8:03 a.m. It's Saturday, so I'm obviously not up as early as I normally am. I mean, I was up as early, but I wasn't like sitting down and recording. We are doing vocabulary. I feel like we've been talking about spinning vocab or doing the spinning vocab episode for some time. So today we are doing the spinning vocab episode. Before we get started, I will show you how my last bobbin filled up. So here it is. So this is the 4 bobbin of my 124 fractal. This is what's left of my 2 bobbin. If you remember, if you've been here from the beginning, we started spinning this on my Spinolution Bullfrog, which then had a fit. So I had to move over to my Lendrum. So I have my 2 bobbin and my 4 bobbin, and we're going to start the 1 bobbin of my 124 fractal. And never fear, fractal spinning is on the list. So what I did is I typed up a little list. You can't see anything on this, but there are words on this paper. I typed up a little list of the things that we want to talk about, and I'm going to leave it next to me so I don't miss anything, because I knew if I didn't like actually put everything down on paper, I was going to start talking and I was going to forget about the points that I wanted to hit for spinning vocab, because everyone wants to talk about grist. Everyone wants to talk about grist, and everyone wants to talk about fractal spinning. So I'm going to say first off, I'm not a spinning teacher. I'm not a professional. This is not what I do for a living. I am a hobbyist. So if I am unclear, I'm sorry. Also, if I get things wrong, please be gentle if you're going to correct me. I did not pick anything that I'm not confident about, because my personal thing is I don't like talking about things that I don't understand, because I feel like that makes me look silly. So I picked only things that I was pretty sure that I could explain clearly and articulately. But if I get like flustered, because I'm going to be spinning and also trying to explain things to you, this is going to be fun. If I get flustered, please be gentle in your corrections. Also, this episode might be longer than any other one this month because there's a lot to talk about. So we'll see. Hopefully it's not super long, but if you need to like watch it in chunks because it's too long, that's totally okay. All right, let's get the actual present dance. There's only 3 bundles left in my bag, in my basket, which makes me kind of sad, because it means Advent's coming to a close. But also this has been a lot of fun. I'm really glad that I did this, and I'm really glad that you chose to hang out with me. Welcome. If this is your first time here, if you saw spinning vocabulary and you were really interested, welcome. My name is Tashi. This is Vlogmas. And if you've been hanging out with me all month, thank you so much for coming back. I've been noticing repeaters in the comments, and honestly, that brings me a lot of joy when people, that brings me a lot of joy when people, hang out with me the first time and they enjoy it enough that they come back, because that's cool. That's really cool. It's Polworth today, guys. We have Polworth again, which I am honestly super jazzed about. That also means that there's only 3 options left for me to get Rambouillet, and hopefully I don't. Honestly, the Rambouillet is my nemesis. Is kind of like a jokey thing right now, because I can spin Rambouillet. Like, it's not that I can't spin it. It's that it's not something that I would choose. This is really pretty. This is like an Easter egg. Actually, I'll do it this way so you can see all the colors. Super pretty. Polworth is super squishy, and I'm really happy about this. I'm going to prep my bobbin. So I don't have a leader on my bobbin because this is a new bobbin. My Lendrum, if you have watched my tour of spinning wheels video, my Lendrum is my newest wheel. It is secondhand, so it is new to me, but it is my newest wheel. So I'm just going to go ahead and set up my bobbin. I spin with a leader. I know some people don't. Those people are wizards. I think Evie is doing a thing now where she doesn't spin with a leader, but those people are wizards and I need a leader. So what I do is I just take a scrap of hand spun and I do, are these half hitches? I do 2 half hitch knots. I think they're half hitches. Actually, I should close my wheel. Let me make sure it's set up. Okay. I do 2 half hitch knots on the bobbin itself, and then I feed it through, and I'm actually getting a little bit better at this whole orifice business. Also, I lied when I said that I've never had a wheel with an orifice before. My e-spinner requires an orifice hook. So while the statement "I've never had a wheel with an orifice" is true, because my e-spinner is technically an e-spinner, it was not true in like the spirit of the thing. So I pull my leader out, and I like to give myself, so I like to sit about, when spinning short forward, I like to keep my yarn about 8 inches from my wheel. So when fashioning a leader, I like to give myself at least a foot of yarn, and then I tie a knot that's about 4 inches. That's about 4 inches. So I have a loop. So here's my loop, and this is my leader. So when I start, I'll put my fiber in here, and I'll start spinning, and this will build twists, and then it'll load onto the bobbin. So that's how you build a leader, pretty much. This is like my leftover combing waste yarn. So it's probably not the best yarn for a leader, because I like to use something that's smooth and not grabby, but it was the first thing I grabbed. So here we go. All right, we are going to start spinning, and then we will start vocab. The way I put my terms in order from I tried to do like foundation up, and then also I tried to pick things that were like easier to talk about before we start moving on to the more complex things. And the other thing I did is I did go through my phone, and I looked for pictures of my spinning that might help make things easier to understand. So there'll be like pictures on the side throughout me talking if there was a picture I had that I thought would make this easier. So enough delay. All right, we're zooming. I'm all set up. So the first thing on my list is actually a staple length. So I can actually show you that. So I will put in a picture, but pretty much what a staple length is, it's how long a fiber is. Where's the camera? Is that going to focus? That's not focusing. Here it is. So it's how long a fiber is. So to figure out a staple length, for comb top, you want to pull out a bit of it, and you want to hold it between 2 fingers, and you want to tug. And if you can tug between your 2 hands and it's not pulling, then you have 1 staple. This Polworth is actually pretty long stapled, but then you have a staple. If you have like a raw fleece, the way you pull out a staple is you literally just pull out a lock. I think I have a picture of Una's fleece. I'll stick in a picture of Una's fleece, but the way you figure out your staple length is you literally pull out a lock. Now in fleece form, you might have some crimp. So if you really want to measure your staple, you're going to have to like straighten your crimp out. So you have to hold it, or you could measure it like with tension, under tension, but you pretty much pull out a lock of your fleece and you put it against the ruler, and that's how you calculate your staple length. And staple is important when it comes to distance of draft. So when especially if you're doing a short forward spin, ooh, my wheel is much more chattery today than it normally is. I will have to figure out why it's doing that. I hope that's not super distracting. I wonder why she's talking to me so much. Okay, what was I saying? So staple length is really important when it comes to distance of draft, because if you're spinning like a short forward yarn, you want to make sure that your fiber supply hand, the hand that's holding onto your fiber supply, is not holding on so tightly that you can't draft out a staple. And then when you're doing a short forward, you also want to make sure that you're not pulling more than a staple length, because if you keep pulling more than a staple length, your yarn will break. This tension's too high. Let's try that. Nope, that's too low. If you continually pull more than a staple length, your yarn will break on you as you're spinning. So you want to get that like sweet spot where you're pulling just under. I like to pull just under a staple length, unless it's like a really long staple. I'm having a lot of trouble with my tension today. Unless it's like just under a staple length, then I will draft. You guys, BRB, my wheel's being silly. Okay, we're back. I think I figured out my tension issues. It's always harder for me when I start with a new bobbin, especially with my Lundrum, because I just don't know her well enough yet, because she's a new wheel. So like, once I start spinning, I'm good, but every time I have to like stop and start, especially when I'm starting with a new bobbin that has no fiber on it, it takes me a little bit of time to get going, but I think we're okay now. So what was I saying? Oh yes, so your distance of draft. You want to make sure that you're not drafting more than a staple, or your yarn will keep breaking, or what will happen is your single will start to thin out, because you're going to start pulling fewer and fewer fibers if you start drafting more than a staple. I almost always do an inch, unless I have something that's really short stapled, but for the most part, my default is drafting an inch at a time, and that has never failed me. And then you just want to, ooh, we have a slub. I don't like slubs. Gotta get that out. There we go. And then you just want to make sure that your fiber supply hand is holding your fiber loosely. You want to make sure that you're not like squishing it, and that you give yourself a staple length to draft. So that's staple length. The other thing that's like a basic term is micron. So you'll see sometimes people talk about the micron count of their of their fiber or their fleece. And micron refers to the diameter of the individual fiber. So like when people say fine micron, so the lower the number, the finer the fiber is, and the more soft. I say soft in scare quotes because soft is a relative term, but the lower the micron count, the more next to skin it is. So like super fine merinos might be like 17 to 21. We got another slub. Whereas like a long wool might be like a 35. So like you might not want to wear something in the high 30s next to skin, but they might make a good outerwear, or they might make a good rug yarn or a good yarn for weaving textiles for like bags and so on and so forth. Whereas like something like super low and squishy micron you can make for babies. So when you see micron count, that's what they're referring to. Because I love medium wools, my favorite fleeces have always been in like the mid 20s, but I do have like a few really special low micron fleeces that are just, they're special. The fine wools, so like Merino, Polworth, Rambouillet, Targhee, they're probably going to be in like the low 20s. Sometimes you'll see like a super fine merino. That's when they start talking about like the 17s. You start talking about like cashmere and things like that. Those are going to be in the lower teens because they're super fine. And they do micron testing in a lab. So they take the fiber to a lab and they look at it under, I'm assuming it's a microscope, but I don't know anything about like the actual lab tech, so I will not speak about that. But they send the fiber back for lab testing, and then the lab will tell you like what the micron count of your particular fleece or fiber is. And then there are some breed standards. Now there's going to be variation obviously in every breed, but in the Fleece and Fiber source book they do give you ranges for what is common for each breed. So that's pretty much what micron count refers to. I mean, again, next to skin stuff's going to be considered lower micron, but like I've worn Romney next to skin, and Romney on average I think is like 27 to 30, and I can wear Romney next to skin all the time without prickle. So next to skin in all those terms is definitely a personal adventure, and you got to figure out what your tolerance is for prickle. Joshua makes me laugh. He has zero tolerance for wool. I've given him like some super fine Shetland to hold against him, and he's like, oh, that's itchy, that's itchy, that's itchy. And I'm like, there's no way. That's the thing. It's like a personal adventure, and you got to figure out what your preferences are, and your mileage may vary. So, next we'll talk about wraps per inch and twist per inch. And twist angle, because those things are all kind of like related. So wraps per inch refers to how wide your yarn is, and you can calculate the wraps per inch of your singles and then the wraps per inch of your finished yarn. And obviously the more plies you have, your wraps per inch is just going to go up compared to your singles. So like 16 wraps per inch is considered like fingering. Well, like 20 to 16 is considered like fingering. Every time I look up standard wraps per inch like ranges, everybody does it a little bit differently. So I guess it just depends on what you knit and how what your gauge is, because I think gauge is more important than wraps per inch, especially if you're spinning yarn to knit into a project. Gauge is way more important than wraps per inch, because you could have something that like has 16 wraps per inch but knits up at like a fingering weight gauge, and that's a fingering yarn, whereas you could have something that's not, and maybe in a knit fabric knits up more at like a sport weight gauge. So I think gauge is more important than wraps per inch, but it is also a really helpful tool when you start spinning to kind of like check. Also, wraps per inch helps you become a more consistent spinner. So if you check your wraps per inch of your singles and of your plied yarn as you're working, it is a very easy way to become a more consistent spinner. I keep my wraps per inch tool, and I'll put a picture of it. I keep my wraps per inch tool on my spinning wheel. It's actually on my Bullfrog, which is currently not being used. The reason it's not on this is because I am not really spinning this for consistency. I'm spinning it for fun. And it looks, to my eye, it looks pretty consistent. I can spin short forward pretty consistently without constantly checking. My long draw, because I'm still practicing, will get thick and thin if I don't keep an eye on it, especially if I'm trying to spin an Aran weight yarn. Like, my default yarn is a lace weight single. That's just what I like to spin, and it's what my hands do. So if I'm trying to spin something that's like bulky, I don't spin bulky. If I'm trying to spin like a 3-ply worsted weight yarn, I have to constantly check my wraps per inch on my single to make sure that I'm not defaulting to my lace weight single, which is not going to give me an Aran weight yarn unless I do like 8 plies, which is not my idea of a good time. So that's what you do. So pretty much what the wraps per inch tool is it tells you what the thickness is, and you lay your yarn. And you want to make sure when you calculate your wraps per inch that you don't calculate it under tension. So like, I like to just let it hang out of my orifice and then check it, because if you pull it, you are going to distort your what result you get, because you're holding your yarn under tension when you want to let it be relaxed. The other thing you could do with the wraps per inch is you can actually take a ruler and then wrap it per inch, because that's what wraps per inch really means. So you can take a ruler and you can wrap your yarn around an inch of your ruler, and you want to make sure you do it again loosely, not under tension, not holding anything too taut, and that'll tell you what your wraps per inch is. And then you can refer to any of the myriad of wraps per inch tables out there and see what yarn that is giving you. I think like 12 is considered DK and 9 to 10 is considered worsted. And then like, but also like 8 to 9 is considered Aran. I don't know. Every table is a little bit different. I use the table that's on my my tool calculator, but again, I also rely on gauge. So like I knit when I sample, especially if I'm spinning like a big fleece project, I spin a sample and then I knit it up, and I make sure that it's being knit according to the gauge in the pattern that I'm, hopefully aiming for. And if I don't have a pattern in mind, I'll just knit it on like what a sport weight needle is. Like, most sport patterns are going to be knit on like US 5 or US 6. So I'll knit a swatch on US 6s and see if I like the fabric. Then that is more important to me than, what number it is. I mean, sometimes it's really cool to just be like, hey, I'm spinning a 40 wraps per inch lace single, because that's really cool to do. But then what information does that give you in the long run, right? And if you're trying to weave, then that's a completely different thing. Then you need to think about set and all those other things. So, but wraps per inch is a really good place to start when it comes to becoming a more technical spinner. And wraps per inch and twist angle go pretty much hand in hand. So twist angle is important, because if you don't have twist, you don't have yarn. If you don't have twist, you have a big old fiber noodle that is going to drift apart and is not going to have any integrity. So when we spin yarn, all we're doing is adding twist to the fibers to hold it together. That's what we do when we're spinning yarn. We're adding twist. Your twist angle is a direct reflection of how tightly twisted or how loosely twisted something is. So pretty much what you would do, all right, so we're gonna do a ply back test, just because I have it here. So let's pretend this is plied. You could do it on your singles. Oh, look at how beautiful that is plied. I don't think that's focusing at all, but look at how beautiful that is plied. So you would take let's say this is your finished yarn, and I personally like high twist yarns. That's obviously your mileage will vary. I like high twist yarns. I almost always aim for a 35-degree twist angle on my yarns because I like high twist yarns. But that is yarn specific and fiber specific. So, and also project specific. So you would take your fiber and you would look at the direction. First, you have to decide if you're doing like a S twist or a Z twist. So I'm spinning my single Z twist. So I'd be using the Z twist side of my twist angle tool. And my twist angle tool is also on my wraps per inch tool. So on the picture you would see, it looks like a sunburst, and it has a bunch of lines that are angled out in diagonals, and then it has numbers, and that's the degree of your twist angle. Stop spinning. And then you would hold it up to that, and you would check the twist angle. So you would hold this up to your tool, and basically you would see where the lines are and if that matches the angle of your twist. And then when you're doing it with plied yarn, you would do it on the S side, because I spin Z and ply S. And I hope I'm saying that right, because I always forget which way. I spin clockwise and ply counterclockwise, which is what like spinning conventions are. But the reason twist angle is important is because you ever hear people say they spin and they made rope? That's because they had too much twist in their yarn and their twist angle was probably too high. Now, I say I like high twist yarns, but like if I spin Gotland high twist, I'm making rope. If I spin any long wool high twist, I'm making rope, which is why I was like, I like high twist yarns, but I added that caveat. So I will aim for a 35 for like a fine wool, something with a lot of crimp that I know can take a lot of twist, but like something with like a Gotland, I might aim for like a 25 to 30, which is like a softer spun yarn. And there are, you know, there are projects where you want a soft spun single but a high twist ply, or a high twist single but a low twist ply. And these are all things that you experiment with as you spin. Like, what kind of yarns do you enjoy making, and what kind of yarns do you enjoy knitting with? I personally like a balance twist, balance ply. So I aim for 30 degrees in my single and then 35 degrees in my ply. Twist angle is also another way that you can check to make sure you're becoming more consistent. If you check your twist angle across your yarn as you're spinning it and it's the same, then it's a good reflection that the yarn you are spinning is a consistent yarn. If there are some places that it is over twisted and some places that it is under twisted, and when I say over and under, I mean relative to what your sample is, not like, I mean, obviously you can tell something's overspun. If you start getting those little pigtails in your single as you're spinning it, your single might be overspun. But if you're aiming for like a 30-degree twist angle, and in some places your twist angle is 40, in some places your twist angle is 25, then you're not spinning the most consistent yarn. And so you can do a few things. You can start counting treadles. When I started practicing spinning more consistent yarns, I counted treadles for my ply. So I would ply, like I would have my orifice be here, and I would hold it up to my hip, and then I would count treadles, and then I would load it onto my bobbin. And that way I was making sure that each length of yarn had the same amount of twist in it as I was plying, so that I had a more consistent twist angle. So you can do things like counting treadles. You can do things like make sure your distance of draft is consistent. Like, try to make sure you're drafting the same amount every single time, and try to make sure you're treadling at the same rate and rhythm. Sometimes if you treadle while you're listening to music, you will start treadling faster or slower depending on what you're listening to. So maybe spin in a quiet room so you can really be intentional about what you're doing. I actually don't spin to music anymore. I spin to audiobooks, because even though I try my best, I will start treadling faster or slower depending on what I'm listening to, because spinning is a very rhythmic activity. So like, it's like spinning on a bicycle. Like when you go to spin classes, they play high intensity music for a reason. Like, you're not going to go spinning and listening to like Adele, because then you're not going to spin very fast. So spinning is the same thing, because it's like a very rhythmic activity. I try not to listen to rhythmic things, and if I do, I listen to things that have the same rhythm, like a consistent rhythm. Like, I will put it on like a sad pop playlist, because I know that there won't be like highs and lows. Pretty much every song is going to be the same tempo. Otherwise, I'll listen to an audiobook or a podcast, or I will spin with nothing at all, and I'll just take the time to like be in my body and hang out with my spinning wheel and like use that as a form of meditation. Twist per inch is related to your twist angle, and it's how many times your yarn twists around itself in an inch. So you would count how many bumps there are on your yarn, and then you would divide that by your plies. So if in an inch of yarn you have 12 bumps, and then you have a 3-ply yarn, you would divide 12 by 4, and you would have a 4 twist per inch yarn. And your twist per inch is going to be directly related to your twist angle. If you have a lower twist angle, you're going to have less twist per inch. And if you have a higher twist angle, you're going to have more twist per inch. If you don't want to pull out your twist per inch, your twist angle tool at every time during your spinning, you can also count twist per inch. Like, if you pick a metric and you're consistent with it as you spin, chances are you will make a more consistent yarn. So you can also count bumps per inch. So if you don't want to like do the, I'm going to count bumps and like divide, you can count bumps per inch, and it will give you pretty much the same information as twist per inch. But whatever you choose to track, make sure you're consistent about it. So don't like track bumps per inch and then start tracking twist per inch in the same yarn, because your notes are going to get confusing. But yeah, your twist angle is directly related to your twist per inch. So high twist, more twist per inch. Lower twist, less twist per inch. And twist per inch is something you can easily track as you're applying, because you just, you know, you'll pull out a length of your plied yarn, hold it up against a ruler. So here's my ply test. And if I was going to hold it up against a ruler, I would say that this has, like, let's say this is an inch of yarn. This has looks like about 8 bumps over an inch of yarn. And I would divide that by 2 because this is a 2-ply yarn. And that would mean that I have a 4 twist per inch yarn. You can also do this on your finished yarn. And you just, if you're doing it on your finished yarn, you just want to make sure you do it in a few places to give yourself the most accurate information. But like if you start plying and you calculate your twist per inch and then you keep plying, you can just keep checking it as you're plying. And that'll help you make sure you're making a more consistent yarn, so that when you go to skein your yarn, you don't have some places where it's like super plied and other places where it's underplied, if that makes sense. These are all metrics for helping you track consistency in your spins. Now, if you're not interested in becoming a more consistent spinner, or you just enjoy spinning art yarn, then these terms might not be for you. But if you're making yarn for knitting, or if you're spinning like big fleece projects, my drive wheel is like rocking back and forth, and that is like a new phenomenon, and I probably should look at that when we're done. But if you're spinning like a big fleece project and you're spinning like a pound or 2 pounds or whatever have you of fiber, and you're hoping for the same yarn consistently throughout as you spin, because you know those projects take like a month or 2 months. It's not something that you're spinning in a day. So you're going to get off your wheel, you're going to sit at your wheel, you're going to get off your wheel, you're going to sit at your wheel, and you're hoping to have a consistent project when you're done. Twist per inch, wraps per inch, and twist angle are going to help you figure out what's going on. And the other big thing, and this is the thing that everybody wanted to talk about, is grist. And grist is your yards per pound. What grist tells you is if I have X amount of fiber in the weight and mass, I should get X amount of yardage of finished yarn. I always use a 15-gram sample, no less than 15 grams. Sometimes I do 20 to 25, no less than 15-gram sample to calculate my grist. And I do 15 grams because 15 grams is a good amount of time for me to get in a good rhythm. Because if you do like a 5-gram sample, you don't, honestly, the first few treadles on a spin anyway are like garbage treadles. You're still learning your fiber. You're still trying to figure out how you want to spin it. You're checking your distance of draft. You might be treadling faster, treadling slower, trying to figure out how much twist to put in something. So the first few like yards of yarn are garbage. It's not useful information at all. And if you're only doing like a 5-gram sample, then like half of your sample is useless information. So I always do at least 15 grams, 15 to 20. And that's of anything. If I'm doing a comb top combo spin, 15 to 20. If I'm doing a fleece spin, 15 to 20. And I spin it the way I think I'm going to spin my finished yarn. So if I'm doing a big fleece project, the first thing I do is I do my 2-ply ply back test and my 3-ply ply back test. I hate saying 2-ply ply back. It gets stuck in my mouth all the time. But I do my 2-ply back test and I look at them and I try to decide what I want to do with this yarn. I also try to decide how I want to spin it. Do I want to spin it fine? Do I want to spin it like more worsted weight? Am I looking for like a 3-ply DK, a 3-ply whatever? And I make those decisions. And then once I make those decisions, so I spin a little bit of a fine single, I do a ply back. I spin a thicker single, I do a ply back. I do a thicker than that single and I do a ply back. And I figure out which of those that I really enjoyed, which is why the first few grams of your sample are garbage, because you're experimenting. Once I'm happy with how I'm spinning my fiber, I do my control card. So I pull off a little bit of my singles and I wrap it, and then I do my 2-ply and my 3-ply ply back test, and I put that on my control card. And then I spin the rest of my sample, which is why you need a good sample. You need a good amount of fiber so that you can make sure that you have enough fiber to do all of those things. Now, this is only if you're interested in like a good sampling process. If you're not interested in sampling, you just want to spin for spinning's sake. I didn't sample here. I literally was like opening fiber every day and spinning. But this is if you want to do like a thorough sampling process. So once you spin your yarn, you're going to ply it up, and then you're going to finish it the way you plan on finishing your project. And finishing is very important before calculating grist, because fiber does fun things in the water. And if you don't finish your yarn, you don't have a good sample. Finish your yarn exactly how you plan on finishing your finished project, and then you calculate your grist. So what you're going to do is you're going to weigh your sample, and you're going to take your yardage of your sample, and you're going to calculate your grist. So I always look this formula up, but I'm pretty sure it is your yardage divided by your sample in grams and then multiplied by 4.3.5. I'm pretty sure that is what you do. It's 453 point something. Sometimes I just do 454 because like the decimal places is annoying. But you take your yardage in yards, divide it by your mass in grams, and multiply it by we'll just say 454. And what that gives you is your yardage per pound. So if you were to spin your entire fiber the exact same way that you spun your sample, it is an estimate of how many yards per pound you will get when you're done. If you're spinning a project and you need 1,500 yards and your grist is 1,000, then at the bare minimum, you need 1.5 pounds to make sure you have enough yarn at the end of the day. And that's what grist tells you, is it tells you how much fiber you need to finish your project. So if you spin and your grist is 1,000 and you need 1,500 yards and you only have 1 pound of fiber, you're not going to have enough fiber for your project. So then you don't want to spin that whole thing and then at the end of the day be heartbroken because you should have checked your grist and that would have told you. You could probably spin it finer, but if you're spinning to a particular weight for a particular project and you try to spin finer, then you no longer have the yarn you need for your particular project. So it's better to calculate your grist straight at the top and make sure you have enough fiber for a project than either get more fiber or change the project, then be heartbroken when you do this big spin and you don't have enough yarn at the end of it. So that's what grist is. Grist will tell you if you spin a yarn this exact way and you have 1 pound of it, this is how many yards you should get. My grist is normally plus or minus like 3% based on my samples because I take a lot of notes. If you don't take notes while you spin your yarn and then you calculate grist and you spin a completely different yarn, don't be mad when your grist is off. The notes you're taking, your grist is for this same yarn. If you do not reproduce that same yarn over 1 pound of fiber, your grist is going to be different. Which is why, if you are hoping for a big project, you should take notes at every stage of it to make sure that you're going to get the yarn you want at the end. Do you understand? Are you getting the like trend here? Take notes. If you are interested in becoming, I might actually run out of fiber before I finish vocabulary. So we're about halfway down the list, so we'll see. But if you are interested in becoming a technical spinner and you're doing big projects, you have to take notes because grist and all those things mean nothing if the yarn that you're spinning is not the same as the yarn you spun in your sample. So that's grist. So those are like the fun technical things. Now we'll move on to some more fun stuff. People wanted to talk about fractals. So what a fractal spin is, it's a way of color management. So I kept saying I was spinning a 1, 2, 4 fractal. What that means is, so the easiest way to see a fractal is in like a repeated, a dyed braid where the color repeats. So if you're spinning a 3-ply fractal, I like to split my fiber widthwise across the width of the fiber, which I know is not everyone's jam. Some people split their fiber lengthwise, but I find it easier to get 3 even bobbins if I split my fiber widthwise. So like widthwise would be like if I split it like this versus lengthwise would be if I split it down this. Just so we're clear what I'm saying. And if you're spinning a fractal, like a 1, 2, 4 fractal, which is what I'm doing here, 1/3 of the fiber you will not split vertically at all. So you see, when I started spinning this fiber, I didn't split it. I have the whole width of the braid in my hand. This is the one side of the fractal. And then if you've been here the whole time, you'll see that for the 2 bobbins, I split it in half. And for the 4 bobbins, I split it 4 times down the length of the braid. Now, this yarn is going to be interesting to see it because the colors aren't all the same. But if you're doing it in a 1/4 ounce braid, what a fractal does, and I like fractal spinning, so I have a bunch of pictures of bobbins that are saved for fractal spinning, so I'll put some pictures as I'm talking. But what a fractal does is because your fiber is getting, your actual like fiber supply gets smaller and smaller widthwise, the color repeats happen faster and faster the more you split your fiber. So like you'll see here with this bobbin, because I haven't split the fiber at all, the color repeats are really, I don't think I'm in focus today at all, but the color repeats are really wide. They're really wide bricks of color, whereas here in my, hold on, I'm gonna put my autofocus back on. So here in my 2 fractal, you'll see that the color repeats are a little bit wider, and in my 4 fractal, you'll see the color repeat bands are a little bit more narrow. So I'm going to turn my autofocus back off because then it keeps trying to focus on the Christmas lights behind me and not on my actual spinning. So there we go. We'll try to make sure I stay in focus. So because the color repeats change, when you go to ply your yarn, 1 ply, you'll get really, really long, gradual sweeping changes. 1 ply will change a little bit faster, and 1 ply will change very, very fast as you ply it, and it makes a really fun gradual color shifting yarn. You don't get those like harsh stripes that you get if you do like a traditional 3 ply where you spin it as it comes. It just helps the stripes in the yarn blend a little bit better. So that's part of the reason why fractals are my favorite yarns to spin. I almost always spin a 1-2-4, which is what I'm spinning here, or a 1-3-6. I always give myself a 1 ply because I feel like that's the foundation of my yarn, is the 1 ply, the ply that changes like the slowest. And then I do some variation of 2 and 4 or 3 and 6. I did a 1-4-8 once, which was really, really fun because the 8 ply, the colors were like changing almost instantly, which is really fun to see in the finished yarn. And then when you knit it up, it knits up like stripes. Now, I don't really knit my finished yarns by themselves. I'm typically using them in color work. Actually, I do have a picture of a fractal that I knit in socks, so I'll put that here. But I normally knit mine up in like color work, so then it gives me like fun, gentle changes in my color work. I did knit a brioche hat in a fractal yarn. So yeah, I guess I do actually knit up my yarns. I was very incorrect about that. So that's what a fractal spin is. It's just color management. There are a number of ways of color managing your yarn. You just got to figure out what kind of yarn you want and then decide. And obviously sample, and experiment. But fractals are my default. That's if I pick up a colored braid and I have no idea, I'm spinning a fractal. The other thing you can do is you can chain ply. And what a chain ply does is it plies a yarn back on itself and it creates a self-striping yarn. So pretty much what you do is you spin your whole single to 1 bobbin, and then when you ply it on itself, because the colors are not mixing and matching, you end up with preserved bands of color and you get a self-striping yarn. Chain plying is super fun, but it is not the easiest. It's not like the most intuitive motion because it's not like you're just grabbing, you know, multiple plies and wrapping them around each other. But there's tons of videos out there on chain plying, and honestly, just go slow. Go slow and practice the motion until it starts to make sense to you, and then you'll make beautiful self-striping yarn. The other thing that's cool about a chain ply is it mimics a 3-ply yarn, so it gives you a really, really round yarn, whereas like a 2-ply will give you like a more oval yarn. So chain ply yarns just give you like these really round, bouncy, do I need to move this again? Give you these really round, bouncy yarns, and so they're a lot of fun to spin. Okay, we are, my lord, we're half an hour in. This is much longer than I thought it was going to be. So we'll talk about woolen and worsted yarns. So woolen and worsted yarns are almost directly related to the type of prep. So you have to start with your prep to figure out if you're spinning a woolen or worsted yarn. But a worsted yarn is what I'm spinning right now. It's short forward. It's pulling forward and smoothing. You could also do short backward, which is what this is. Well, no, actually this is continuous backward, which is, but it's like you pull back and smooth, and then you load onto your bobbin. And I have to think really hard to spin continuous backward because it's not my normal it's not my normal way of spinning. So if I sound a little discombobulated, that's why. But short forward, short back. I can't do short back because I never learned short. Yeah, short backward's hard for me. But pretty much that was that terrible thing with short backward. Oh Lord. See, it's doing it again. I'm putting my manual focus back. I decided I wanted to get interesting with my spinning, and my camera rebelled. So I'm not going to do that anymore. But yeah, so you can do short forward, short backward, continuous backward, and that will give you a worsted yarn. So what you do is you pull a little bit and you compress the yarn as you spin it. I am literally going to spin this whole ounce of fiber before I finish explaining all these things to you guys. So you pull a little bit and you smooth. You pull a little bit and you smooth. You pull a little bit and you smooth. This is, yeah, see, oh Lord, my focus and I are not having a good time today, guys. I'm not sure what's happening. Give me another second while I figure it out. Okay, I'm sorry we're so disjointed today. I was having, the last few days were really good, and then today, because I decided to do different things with my hands, I think my camera does not know what to focus on, and so it's having a bit of a hard time. So that's a worsted yarn. A woolen yarn has air trapped in it, whereas worsted yarns do not. You smooth out most of the air in a worsted yarn to create a woolen yarn. So a woolen yarn, you would spin long draw. Let's see if I can actually spin long draw with this. Okay. So woolen yarn, you would spin long draw. So you're not doing that same short forward thing. I knew that was going to happen. I find it really hard to spin long draw from a top preparation. I was going to try and be interesting, but that was a bad idea and I shouldn't have done that. I find it really hard to spin long draw from top. So I only spin worsted yarns from top. But pretty much what a woolen yarn is it has air trapped in the yarn. Woolen yarns tend to be really light and lofty and really warm. My Lord, what's happening? Woolen yarns tend to be light and lofty and be really warm because they have air trapped in them. And you spin them. You can spin them long draw. You can spin them... I'm going to pull out all that stuff I did because that does not have enough twist in it. I'm just going to pull it out and discard it. You can spin it long draw. You can spin it from the fold, which... No, we're not experimenting anymore today. We're not experimenting anymore today. But you can spin it long draw. You can spin it from the fold and also spin it long draw. Or you could do like... You could do a woolen draft where you let you let twist in between your fiber supply. So this is technically a woolen yarn. I'm not smoothing it, and I'm letting the twist into my fiber supply. But I don't like that, so I'm not going to do that. But anytime you let twist into your fiber supply, you're spinning a more woolen yarn. And if you don't let twist into your fiber supply, you're spinning a more worsted yarn. And I tried to do all those demos, and all I did was confuse myself. So I will do that properly someday. But that's like a woolen versus worsted yarn. And a lot of that starts from prep. So a combed prep is going to make it easier to make a worsted yarn. Now you can spin a woolen yarn from a combed prep. I'm just not very good at it, so I will not show that to you. Whereas a woolen prep, which is a carded prep, will make it easier to spin a woolen yarn, but you can also spin a semi-worsted yarn from a carded prep if you spin it short forward. It will not be a true worsted yarn because a woolen prep, the fibers are disorganized, and with a combed prep, the fibers are aligned and laid next to each other. So if you look at like comb top, you'll see you just have rows and rows and rows of fibers laid next to each other and they're kind of parallel. Whereas in a woolen prep, the fibers are disorganized, which really lends it to spinning long draw. So you can get a semi-worsted yarn if you spin short forward with a woolen prep, but you're not going to get a worsted yarn the way you would if you spun from a comb top. So when it comes to preps, for woolen yarns, you have Rovings, you have Rolags, and you have bats. And a bat is just a big sheet of unorganized fiber. It's what you see people pull off of a drum carder, those big fuzzy sheets. That is just a big sheet of fiber off of a drum carder or a carding machine. You can then pull that into roving, because what roving is strips of disorganized fiber. A lot of people use roving and top interchangeably. I'm done. I knew this was going to happen. I finished my spin. I probably should turn the camera around. Maybe when I finish talking about this, I'll turn the camera on so you can see me as I continue talking, because there's still 4 more things on this list. So a lot of people use roving and top interchangeably, but top is a combed preparation, and roving is a carded preparation. And you can take a bat and strip it down into pieces, and if you do that, you will have roving. Whereas Rolags are rolled bits of fiber. And most people do Rolags off of a blending board, but you can do Rolags off of a drum carder. And Rolags are cool because it really gives you that vortex effect because the fiber is rolled on itself. And it's really, really nice for spinning long draw from a Rolag because the fibers are just rolled up on itself. Rolags you can also spin with a semi-worsted draft, but you're not going to get a true worsted yarn because you're starting with a carded prep. So I hope that makes sense. And I will, of course, be inserting pictures the entire time. And I'm just going to turn the camera to face me because I have no more spinning to do. Hi. Okay, we're back. I finished all my spinning, even though my wheel and I, not even my wheel, my camera and I had a few differences of opinions today. We'll make up eventually. This is what happens when you're still learning fancy tech and you try to do fancy things and you don't know how to use fancy tech. So growing pains. I really do need to figure out my focus situation if I'm ever going to do any sort of spinning tutorials, because I would hate to like sit and practice and be like, here's how you spin this thing. Also, there's the moonlight. And then my hands aren't in focus at all. So good thing I wasn't actually trying to give like a spinning tutorial today. We were just talking words, because that would be deeply frustrating for me and deeply frustrating for you. I know. Okay, so that's preps. And we'll move on. So you've gotten you understand how to spin. You have your prep. You spin your woolen yarn, you spin your worsted yarn. Two more things we're going to talk about. One thing we're going to talk about is the thing we actually spin on. So somebody had a question about spinning whirls. And what a whirl is, Lord, I have no idea. This is, I'm going to take my flyer off and show it to you, but we are already having a time with this. I'm not going to do that. But what a whirl is pretty much, the whirl tells you for every one rotation of your drive wheel, which is the big wheel, how many times your flyer will spin. So when someone says I'm spinning at a ratio of 17:1, it means that for every full rotation of your big wheel, your flyer spins 18 times. 18:1 is pretty fast, which means you're going to be putting a lot of twist into your yarn. Also, this depends on how fast you treadle. If you treadle really slowly, 18:1 will not put in as much twist as someone who treadles pretty quickly. I treadle pretty quickly, so I spin pretty quickly. But like if I treadled slower and I wanted to build twist, I would have to draft slower, because the amount of twist you put in your yarn is directly related to how fast you're treadling and what your spinning ratio is. If you want high twist, you need a higher ratio, and you need to make sure that there is enough time for twist to build into your fiber. So you might need to draft slower and spin at a higher ratio. I always try to change my wheel mechanics before I change my body mechanics. Like I don't want to have to treadle super fast, so I will go up to a higher ratio if that's possible, or I'll just slow down how fast I draft. Just as I want to preserve my knees. So like if I'm trying to force myself to like on the wheel, that might be too much. So in order to preserve my knees, I will either change my ratio or I will change my hands, because that is easier for me to change if I need more twist in a yarn. 18:1 is what my Lendrum maxes out at right now, but I am getting at some point the very fast lace flyer that goes up to 42:1, and you guys are not ready for me to have. I'm not ready for me to have a very fast flyer. That's going to be a lot. So that is what your spinning ratio is. I mean, 18:1 is pretty fast if you're new to spinning. So like maybe start at like a 7, 8, 9, 10. And start like in the middle of the pack so you have enough time, because you still need to figure out how to coordinate your hands and your feet. And if your wheel is going too fast and your hands or your feet cannot get it together, it's just going to be really frustrating. So I would say start off, medium tension. You don't want your fiber being ripped out of your hand, and start on a medium whirl. So something large enough that you have time to draft and treadle and practice the motions. And then once you're like comfy, then you can, zoom. I like to zoom. It's part of the reason why I ply on my e-spinner, because then I turn that baby all the way up, and then I'm like zoom, 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 and I'm done plying in like 5 seconds. So that's spinning ratios. The other thing is Irish tension versus Scotch tension. I only spin Scotch. My wheels and my e-spinner are all Scotch tension. And what Scotch tension is the drive belt is on the flyer. So the drive belt, my lord. I'm trying to show you things on my wheel because it's right next to me, but I'm like terrified of moving my camera again because it's just... So the drive belt wraps around the wheel, the drive wheel, and then it wraps around some other part of your spinning wheel. So for a Scotch tension wheel, the drive band wraps around the belt. I mean, the drive band wraps around the belt. The drive band wraps around the drive wheel, and then it wraps around your flyer. and that is a Scotch tension wheel. And then you tension your bobbin. So like if you saw me constantly adjusting my tension and loosening my tension, the tension is on the bobbin and the drive band spins the wheel, spins the flyer. God, I said that wrong. The drive band spins the flyer, so that's what builds twist. In Irish tension, the drive band is on the bobbin. And I've never spun Irish tension, but I've heard it's like harder, especially for beginners, and I'm not interested. I've learned Scotch tension. I know how to use the Scotch tension wheel, so I tend to just be attracted to Scotch tension wheels. But Scotch tension wheels are flyer led, and Irish tension wheels are bobbin led. A few of my friends who've spun Irish tension have said it's just more difficult than Scotch, so your mileage may vary. I don't even know any wheels that are Irish tension, actually. All of the wheels that I know that I was interested in are Scotch tension. So that's the difference. I know some people have asked what the difference is. Because I have no experience with Irish tension, I can't really tell you anything else about it besides the definition. But I do like a Scotch tension because then I can just tweak my tension based on my bobbin. And that's pretty much what it is. So we have gotten through whirls. We've gotten through the different types of like spinning setups. I think the last thing that's on the list is finishing. Yes. So you have done all your samples. You've calculated all your stuff. You know if you're spinning a woolen yarn or a worsted yarn. You figured out your spinning ratios. You've written all that down. Oh, for heaven's sake, write your spinning ratios down. I guarantee you will not remember. You will not remember. And you'll come back to the spin a month later because you took it off of your wheel to start something new because the chaos gremlin in your head was like, I don't want to spin Rambouillet anymore. And you go back to finish your Rambouillet project and you have no idea what spinning ratio you were spinning this on. And so you spend a half an hour trying to replicate the wheel that you were already working, the yarn you were already working on. Ask me how I know this. Write it down. Write everything down. Make little tags for each of your projects, or better yet, get a spinning journal or use your phone. You have the notes app. Every time you start a spin, write it down. Write what ratio you're spinning on. I promise you will not remember. You won't. I mean, unless your wheel only has like 3 ratios, then you might remember. But my Bullfrog has 5, and with my Lendrum, I now have 6. So write it down. Do yourself a favor. And if you don't remember the numbers, just write big, medium, small, or whatever. Just write it down. So you've gotten your yarn made, and now you need to finish it. Now, the way I finish my yarns is I do a very gentle finish. So wool has scales, and when you put yarn in hot water, it opens the scales up, and that's why yarn has that bloom factor. So when people talk about like the yarn blooms in the washing, the yarn opens up, and then you put soap in your water, and the soap acts as a surfactant and breaks the surface tension in your water so that your water can go into your yarn and give your yarn that big bloom. So you put in like a 16 wraps per inch yarn and pull out like a 12. It's almost never that dramatic, but it sometimes does get bigger, which is why you need to finish your yarn before calculating grist. That's why. Because yarn will get bigger, and also the length of your yarn will shrink. Sometimes you'll put in a skein that's like this big, and you'll pull it out and it's like this big, and you're like, where did a third of my yarn go? That's why you got to finish your yarn before calculating your grist. I like to put yarn in very, very hot, not very hot, not as hot as I'm scouring, but pretty hot water with soap, and I leave it until the water cools. Because as the water cools, the scales gently come to a close and close back on your yarn, and it's a really gentle finish. You end up with a really soft finished yarn. The other thing somebody wanted me to explain, because I talked about it, was fulling your yarn. I don't full my yarns because I don't weave and I don't spin singles. And really, I think those are the 2 places where you really want to consider fulling your yarn, is if you're weaving or if you're spinning a singles yarn, because it'll add some integrity to your yarn. But pretty much what you do when you full a yarn is you go from hot water to cold water to hot water to cold water to hot water to cold water. And what that does is it shocks it. And it almost begins the felting process, like not so much because you're not agitating it, but it almost begins the felting process. So the scales on the wool open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close from that constant change in temperature. And what that does is it shocks your yarn and it constricts it a little bit, and it makes it like a really firm, more robust yarn. So if you're spinning a single that's not being plied, so it doesn't have that extra structure of being plied, fulling your yarn helps hold your single together a little bit better. And if you're weaving, where you're going to be putting your yarn under a lot more tension than like maybe in a knitted project, fulling your yarn will give it a little bit more stability. So those are your, I mean, there's a number of finishing options. You don't have to do the like hot water to cold. I just do that because I find that like, I think it makes nicer yarn. Especially if I'm going to be making a garment that I want to hold next to skin, because it just makes everything lay nice and flat and pretty. But you can full it. You can just do a cold water soak for like 20 minutes. You can, I personally don't thwack my yarns, which is when you like hit it against something. I just do a gentle snap. So I snap, snap, snap. I turn it 90 degrees. I snap, snap, snap. I do 90 more degrees, snap, snap, snap. And then I do 90 degrees. And I just hold my yarn between my hands and like snap it a few times and then just keep turning it. Some people thwack it where they hit it against like a surface. I don't do that. That seems really mean to the yarn that I love very much. So I don't do that. Also, that does kind of like agitate your fibers and kind of roughs it up a little bit. And if I'm spinning this like super smooth worsted yarn, I'm not knocking it against something that's going to undo all that smoothing. But you have to figure out your own finishing process and figure out what you love. But that's pretty much what fulling is. And that is everything on the list. I have been recording now for almost 50 minutes. So this video is going to be very long. But I hope you enjoy. You know what I'll do? I'll put timestamps. So if there's only one thing you're interested in, you don't have to watch the whole thing. Or if you do want to watch the whole thing and watch me like, I probably should have put this in the beginning of the video because I'm like explaining what I'm going to do at the end. But if you made it this far, thank you. Happy Vlogmas. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. There are only 3 more bundles. Yeah, there's only 3 more bundles left in my basket. So the season is coming to a close, but thanks so much for spending your December with me. I hope you have a magical weekend, or whatever day you're watching this. I hope you have a magical day. And I'll see you for the next time. Bye for now.